A camper found a torn map inside a fire pit and unraveled a family's disappearance. The fire had died hours ago, leaving a bed of ash that whispered secrets to the wind. Leo didn't mean to find it. He was just a man running from the ghost of a life that had burned down faster than any campfire. He'd driven his beat-up truck into the heart of the Ochoko National Forest, seeking the kind of silence that swallows memories whole. For 3 days, it had almost worked. The towering pines and the indifferent stars had started to feel like a bomb. He was packing up, his movements slow and deliberate in the pre-dawn chill. The last of his gear was in the truck bed, and all that remained was to scatter the cold ashes of his final fire, to leave no trace. Just as he wished he could do with his own past, he nudged the stones of the fire ring with the toe of his boot, a ritual of erasure. That's when he saw it. A corner of something not quite ash, not quite charcoal, peeking from beneath a blackened log. It was stiff, laminated, and unnaturally straight. Curiosity, an emotion he hadn't felt in months, pricked at him. He crouched, the cold of the damp earth seeping through the knee of his jeans. He used a stick to pry the object from the compacted ash. It was a piece of a map, maybe a quarter of it, the edges charred and brittle. The lamination had bubbled and warped from the heat, but it had protected the paper within. He brushed the soot away with his thumb. It wasn't a standard topographical map. This was hand-drawn, intimate, a child's hand. The lines were wobbly, the colors crayon bright. A blue snake of a river, a lumpy green cluster of trees labeled monster woods, and a single, stark red X near a crudely drawn landmark that looked like a broken tree. Or maybe a lightning bolt. But it was the back of the map that made the air freeze in his lungs. Taped to it, shielded by the plastic, was a photograph. A Polaroid, faded and slightly yellowed. A family, a man with a kind, tired smile, his arm around a woman with vibrant red hair that the sun seemed to worship. Between them, a little girl, no older than 7, with a gap-toothed grin and her mother's fiery hair. She was holding up a half-eaten ice cream cone like a trophy. They were happy. The kind of happy that feels like a punch to the gut when you've forgotten what it feels like. Leo's breath hitched. He'd seen them. Not in person, but on a flyer tacked to the bulletin board of the dusty general store in the nearest town, Prineville missing. The word had screamed in bold black letters above this exact photo. The Calloway family, Daniel, Sarah, and their daughter Lily vanished from this very campground 6 weeks ago. The official search had been massive, then scaled back, then called off. The consensus was grim. A tragic accident, a fall, an animal attack. Their bodies likely lost to the unforgiving wilderness. The forest keeps what it takes, but this map, this wasn't the mark of a family lost on a casual hike. This was a treasure map, a child's game, or something else. Something that felt terribly, horribly wrong. Why was it in a fire pit? Why burned? An attempt to destroy evidence. The thought landed like a stone in his stomach. This wasn't just a remnant of a lost family. It was a clue someone had tried to erase. He looked around, the familiar woods suddenly feeling alien and menacing. The whispering pines now sounded like hushed accusations. Every shadow seemed to stretch, to writhe. Was someone watching him? The person who burned this map, were they still out here? The silence he had craved was now a suffocating blanket of paranoia. He felt a primal urge to drop the map, jump in his truck, and drive until the forest was just a green smear in his rearview mirror. Forget he ever saw it. Let the dead rest, but he couldn't. He looked at the girl's smiling face, at the sticky ice cream on her chin, and saw the ghost of his own daughter, Chloe, whose laughter he could now only summon in dreams. He owed this little girl. He owed her the truth. His hands trembled as he carefully folded the charred fragment and slipped it into the breast pocket of his jacket. The plastic crinkling against his chest. It felt both sacred and dangerous, a relic and a time bomb. He kicked the remaining ashes with a newfound urgency. His movements no longer slow, but frantic, clumsy. He had to get out of here. He had to take this to someone. The drive back to town was a blur of asphalt and fear. Every passing car felt like a threat. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a dusty, faceless truck tailing him. The kind that always appears in horror movies right before the end. He clutched the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The photo was burned into his mind's eye. The Callaways, Daniel, Sarah, Lily. They weren't just a headline anymore. They were real, and their final moments, their final secret, was resting in his pocket. He bypassed the local sheriff's office in Prineville. A town this small, a case this bigot would be crawling with a mix of incompetence and politics. He remembered the sheriff from the news reports, a man with a weary, dismissive face who seemed more annoyed by the media attention than concerned about the missing family. No, Leo needed someone outside of that. He drove another hour, the high desert landscape rolling by in waves of sagebrush and juniper, until he reached Bend. He found a police station that looked sterile and impersonal enough to be professional. Walked in, the automatic doors hissing shut behind him, sealing him in with his decision. The air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. A bored-looking officer sat behind a plexiglass barrier, typing with 2 fingers. "I need to report something," Leo said, his voice hoarse, "about the Callaway family." The officer's typing stopped. He looked up, his expression shifting from boredom to a flicker of interest. "The ones who went missing out in Ochoco, yes." Leo's hand went to his pocket, feeling the crinkle of the map. He hesitated. This was it. The point of no return. Once he handed it over, he was part of their story. A witness. A target. "What about them?" the officer prodded, leaning forward. Leo took a deep breath and pulled out the charred fragment, placing it on the counter. He pushed it through the small opening in the plexiglass. "I found this in a fire pit at the campground where they disappeared." The officer picked it up gingerly, his eyes widening as he saw the photo. He turned it over, studying the child's drawing. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights above. "Where exactly did you find this?" he asked, his voice, now sharp, all traces of boredom gone. Leo described the campsite. The specific fire ring, the way he'd found it tucked under the log. He left out the part about his own ghosts, the reason he was out there in the first place. He was just a camper. A concerned citizen. The officer, whose name tag, Red Miller, made a call. His voice was low, urgent. Leo caught phrases. Walk dash in. Callaway case. Possible evidence. Minutes later, a detective came out. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a nonsense haircut. Detective Harding. She didn't smile. She took the map, sealed it in an evidence bag, and led Leo to a small windowless room. The interview was grueling. She asked the same questions, over and over, circling his story, probing for weaknesses. Why was he there? Who did he see? What time did he find it? He told the truth, or at least the parts that mattered. He was a grieving father, seeking solitude. He saw no one. He found the map this morning. You understand this is a major break in the case. Mr. Evans, Harding said, her gaze unwavering. If it's legitimate, Leo said, his voice firm. We'll need you to stay available. We'll have a forensics team sweep the site you described. Don't talk to anyone about this, not a soul, understand? Leo nodded. He understood all too well. He was dismissed with a veiled threat about the seriousness of interfering with an investigation. He walked out of the station into the harsh afternoon sun, feeling strangely empty. He had done the right thing, but it didn't bring the relief he'd expected. It felt like he'd just handed a lit stick of dynamite to someone else, hoping they knew how to defuse it. He spent the night in a cheap motel, the kind with thin walls and questionable stains on the carpet. He couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building, every car that passed on the street outside, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He kept seeing Lily Callaway's gap-toothed smile. He saw the red X on the map. What treasure was she so excited about? What secret did she know? The next morning, his face was all over the local news. A person of interest, a key witness. They used a photo from his driver's license, a grim, haunted image that made him look like a suspect. His name, Leo Evans, was suddenly public property. Harding had told him not to talk to anyone, but someone from inside the department had leaked it to the press. The story was sensationalized. Grieving father finds cryptic map in missing family case. His private pain was now a public spectacle, woven into the fabric of the Callaways' tragedy. His phone, which had been silent for months, began to ring. Numbers he didn't recognize. Reporters, he ignored them, his stomach churning with a sick mix of anger and fear. He had tried to do something good, and it had blown up in his face. He was exposed, vulnerable. He was checking out of the motel, his head down, trying to be invisible, when a man intercepted him in the parking lot. He was big, burly, with a shaved head and a tattoo of a coiled snake on his neck. He wasn't a reporter. His eyes were cold, flat, like chips of granite. "Leo Evans," the man said. It wasn't a question. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. "Who's asking?" The man took a step closer, invading his personal space. He smelled of stale cigarettes and something metallic, like old blood. "You found something that doesn't belong to you, out in the woods." Leo's blood ran cold. This was it. The fear from the forest had followed him here. "I don't know what you're talking about. I gave what I found to the police." The man's lips curled into a sneer. "You gave them a piece. A little girl's drawing, cute. But you and I both know that's not all you found." Leo's mind raced. What was he talking about? He'd found nothing else. The map fragment was everything. That's it. That's all there was. The man shook his head slowly, a look of pitying disappointment on his face. "See, that's a problem. My employer is a very particular man. He doesn't like loose ends. He seems to think you might have found something else. Something smaller, easier to pocket. A memory card, maybe. A little piece of plastic. A memory card." The words hung in the air, charged with menace. Leo's mind flashed back to the fire pit. Had he missed something? A tiny black rectangle, hidden in the ash, or was this a bluff? A terrifying, violent bluff. "I didn't find any memory card," Leo said, his voice shaking despite his best efforts to keep it steady. "I swear." The snake tattoo on the man's neck seemed to pulse. A lot of people say that right before they have a tragic accident. He reached into his jacket, and for a terrifying second, Leo thought he was pulling out a gun. Instead, it was a phone. He held it up, showing Leo the screen. It was a picture of a small suburban house, a swing set in the backyard. Leo's house. A wave of nausea and pure, unadulterated terror washed over him. They knew who he was. They knew where he lived. The ghost of his life wasn't a ghost at all. It was a target. "My employer is willing to be generous," the man said, his voice a low growl. "He wants what's his. You give it back, you walk away. You forget this ever happened. You go back to your sad little life, and we never see you again. But if you lie to me, if you're holding out, well, let's just say that house looks awfully flammable." The threat was absolute, unequivocal. This was no longer about a missing family. It was about him, his life. The last fragile pieces of his world. He was caught in the middle of something far darker and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. The map wasn't just a clue to the Callaways' disappearance. It was a key, and he had just handed it to the police while the real monsters thought he still had the lock. He was trapped. If he went to the cops now, they'd think he was a liar, maybe even an accomplice. If he did nothing, this Manor, the person he worked for, would come for him. He looked at the cold, dead eyes of the man in front of him and saw his own reflection. A man who had already lost everything once and was about to lose it all over again. The cliffhanger wasn't just a turn of phrase. It was the edge of the abyss, and he was standing right on it, the ground crumbling beneath his feet. He had stumbled out of one fire, only to land in the heart of an inferno. The Callaway family wasn't perfect, but they were a snapshot of suburban aspiration, the kind of family that makes you believe in picket fences. Daniel Callaway was a high school history teacher, a man whose gentle nature and passion for the past made him a favorite among students. He was steady, reliable, the anchor of their small world. His colleagues saw him as a bit of a dreamer, a man who believed in the inherent goodness of people, a belief that would be tested in the most brutal way imaginable. His past was quiet, marked only by the early death of his parents in a car crash, a tragedy that had instilled in him a fierce, almost suffocating need to protect the family he had built. He loved Sarah and Lily with a devotion that was both his greatest strength and his most profound vulnerability. He documented everything. Their life was a curated collection of digital photos and videos, stored on a dozen hard drives. A man terrified of losing a single memory dot, Sarah Calloway was the fire to his earth. A freelance graphic designer with a mane of red hair that matched her fiery spirit, she was vibrant, impulsive, and fiercely independent. She had met Daniel in college, drawn to his quiet strength, a calm harbor in the storm of her own chaotic family history. Her father, a man named Alistair Finch, was a real estate mogul, a titan of industry with a reputation for ruthless efficiency and a network of powerful, shadowy connections. Sarah had tried to escape his orbit, to build a life on her own terms, free from the cold, transactional nature of his love. She rarely spoke of him, but the shadow of his influence was long, a source of unspoken tension in her marriage to a man who measured wealth in happiness, not dollars. Alistair had disapproved of Daniel from the start, seeing him as weak, unworthy of his daughter. A sentiment he made clear through passive-aggressive remarks and conspicuously extravagant gifts that served only to highlight the modest life they had chosen. And then there was Lily. 7 years old, a whirlwind of freckles, missing teeth, and boundless curiosity. She was the perfect fusion of her parents, Daniel's gentle heart and Sarah's adventurous soul. She believed in magic, in monsters, and in treasure maps. The forest wasn't a place of danger. It was a kingdom waiting to be explored. The map Leo found was her creation, a weekend project she and her father had worked on together. The monster woods were just a patch of dense firs that looked spooky at dusk. The lightning bolt tree was a real landmark, a massive ponderosa pine that had been struck by lightning years ago, its trunk split and scarred, and the red X. It marked the spot where Daniel had buried a treasure chest, a small metal box containing a new compass for Lily and a silver locket for Sarah. An anniversary gift he'd planned to give her on their trip. It was a game, a symbol of their simple, loving world. The hidden witness to the unraveling of that world was a man named Ben Carter. A former park ranger, Ben now lived a solitary life in a small, dilapidated cabin on the edge of the national forest. His only companion, a scruffy dog named Gus. He was a ghost, haunted by a mistake that had cost him his job, his reputation, and his family. Years ago, during a wildfire, he had made a bad call, a split-second decision that led to the destruction of several homes. Though officially cleared of wrongdoing, the guilt had consumed him. He'd retreated from the world, content to watch it from a distance. His binoculars, his closest friends. From his perch on a ridge overlooking the campground, Ben saw everything. He was the forest's unofficial caretaker, its silent guardian. He watched the campers come and go, the city folk with their shiny RVs and their ignorance of the wilderness. He had watched the Callaways arrive in their modest Subaru, had seen Daniel patiently teaching Lily how to skip stones on the creek, had admired the way Sarah's laughter echoed through the trees. They were different. They respected the forest. They belonged. He was watching on the last day they were seen alive. Through his binoculars, he saw them pack up their campsite, getting ready to leave. But then another vehicle arrived, a sleek, black SUV, the kind that looked ridiculously out of place on the dusty Forest Service road. It pulled up to the Callaways' site, and 2 men got out. Ben didn't recognize them, but he recognized their type. They moved with an unnerving confidence, their city clothes and polished shoes a jarring contrast to the rugged terrain. One was tall and thin, with a cruel, pinched face. The other was the man Leo would later meet in the motel parking lot. The man with the snake tattoo. Ben zoomed in, his knuckles white on the binoculars. He saw them talking to Daniel. The conversation was tense. Daniel stood protectively in front of Sarah and Lily, his body language rigid. Sarah had her arm wrapped around Lily, pulling her close. The man with the snake tattoo was smiling, but it was a predator's smile, all teeth and no warmth. Ben couldn't hear their words, but he could read the scene like a book. This wasn't a friendly chat. It was an intimidation, a threat. His heart pounded. He should do something. Call the sheriff. Fire a warning shot from the old hunting rifle he kept by the door. But fear paralyzed him. The ghost of his past failure rose up, whispering poison in his ear. You'll only make it worse. You'll screw it up again. Stay out of it. And so he watched. He watched as the men seemed to give Daniel an ultimatum. He saw Daniel shake his head, a look of defiant terror on his face. He saw Sarah scream something at them, her voice lost to the wind. Then, everything happened at once. The man with the snake tattoo grabbed Daniel, twisting his arm behind his back. The other man took Sarah, clamping a hand over her mouth. Lily started to scream, a high piercing shriek of pure terror that cut through the forest silence and straight into Ben's soul. He saw them force the family into the back of the black SUV. Daniel was struggling, fighting with a desperate, hopeless strength. Sarah was kicking, biting, a wildcat trapped. Lily was just a small, terrified bundle in the arms of a monster. The whole thing was over in less than a minute. The SUV's doors slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The vehicle turned around and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust and a perfectly neat, abandoned campsite. Ben lowered his binoculars, his body trembling uncontrollably. Gus wind at his feet, sensing his master's distress. He had just witnessed an abduction, a kidnapping. He was the only one who had seen it. The only one who knew the Callaways hadn't just wandered off and gotten lost. He stumbled back into his cabin, his mind a chaotic storm of fear and self-loathing. He should have done something, he should have helped them, but he hadn't. He had just watched. The silent guardian had been nothing but a coward. For the next few days, he was paralyzed by indecision. He followed the news reports, the desperate pleas from the sheriff for any information. He saw the search parties combing the woods, looking in all the wrong places for people who were no longer there. Every time he thought about coming forward, the image of the men's cold, ruthless faces flashed in his mind. They were professionals. They wouldn't hesitate to silence a witness. And who would believe him anyway? The disgraced ranger, the town hermit, telling a wild story about a black SUV and men in suits. They'd think he was crazy. Or worse, involved. His cowardice found a new, more potent fuel. He had a daughter of his own, a teenager who lived with his ex-wife in another state. He sent them money every month, the last thread connecting him to the life he'd lost. If he got involved in this, if these men found out about him, they wouldn't just come for him. They would go after his family. The thought was unbearable, so he stayed silent. He buried the secret deep inside, a toxic shame that festered and grew with each passing day. He watched the search wind down, watched the flyers fade in the sun. He tried to forget what he saw. He tried to convince himself it was a dream, a hallucination brought on by his isolation. But one evening, a week after the abduction, he saw something that shattered his fragile denial. A campfire, burning late into the night, at the Callaways' old campsite. It was unusual. The site was closed, cordoned off with yellow police tape. Through his binoculars, he saw a single figure tending the flames. It was the man with the snake tattoo. Ben watched, his blood like ice in his veins, as the man methodically fed items into the fire. A child's sleeping bag, a small pink backpack, and then a piece of paper. Ben zoomed in just as the flames began to lick at its edges. It was Lily's hand-drawn map. The man watched it burn, his face illuminated by the destructive glow, an expression of grim satisfaction on his face. He was cleaning up, erasing the last traces of the Callaway family. Ben knew then that he couldn't hide forever. He had seen too much. He was no longer just a witness. He was a liability. The secret he was keeping wasn't just about the Callaways. It was about him. And it was only a matter of time before the men from the black SUV came back to the forest to make sure. The last loose end was tied up for good. His fear of them was immense, but a new, more powerful emotion was beginning to take root. The terrifying realization that his silence was not a shield, but a death sentence. He was a man caught in a trap of his own making, the walls closing in with every passing moment. The forest was no longer his sanctuary. It was his prison. The leak of Leo's name and the subsequent confrontation in the motel parking lot was just the beginning. The injustice, the sheer wrongness of it all, began to escalate with brutal speed. Detective Harding, furious about the leak, brought Leo back in for another round of questioning. This time, the atmosphere wasn't one of professional curiosity. It was thick with suspicion. "So, let's go over this again, Mr. Evans," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You just happened to be camping in the exact spot where a family vanished 6 weeks prior. You just happened to find a clue that hundreds of search and rescue volunteers missed. And now, a man who looks like a C-list movie henchman threatens you in a parking lot over a memory card you claim doesn't exist." "I'm telling you the truth," Leo insisted, his voice strained. "He showed me a picture of my house. He threatened me." "Did you get his license plate?" "No, I was terrified. It all happened so fast." "Convenient," Harding muttered, scribbling a note. "You know how this looks, right? It looks like you were involved. Maybe you had a falling out with your partners. Maybe this whole finding the map story is just a way for you to get back at them, or maybe a ploy to get the police to protect you." The accusation was a physical blow. Leo felt the air leave his lungs. He had come to them for help, and now he was being treated like a criminal. The system he had trusted was turning against him, its gears grinding him into the role of a suspect. He was trapped in a nightmare of someone else's making. He gave them the man's description, the snake tattoo, the mention of a very particular employer, but without a name, a plate, a shred of proof. It was just the word of a man they were already predisposed to distrust. They placed him under unofficial surveillance. A police car parked down the street from his house, a constant looming reminder that he was no longer a witness, but a person of interest. The antagonist, the man Leo now knew only as Snake Tattoo, grew bolder. His campaign of terror was not about immediate violence. It was a slow psychological dismantling of Leo's world. A dead squirrel left on his doorstep. A single muddy boot print on his welcome mat. A sign that someone had been there, right outside his door, while he slept. His truck tires were slashed one night. The police report was filed with a dismissive shrug. Vandalism happens all the time. But Leo knew it was a message. "We can get to you whenever we want." He became a prisoner in his own home. He installed new locks, a cheap security camera that fed grainy footage to his phone. He spent his nights awake, jumping at every sound, watching the shadows, his grief for his daughter, now twisted up with a raw, primal fear for his own life. The man's words echoed in his mind. A memory card, maybe? He tore his truck apart, searched every inch of his camping gear, replayed the moment he found the map 1,000 times. Had he missed it? Was it possible? The uncertainty was a special kind of torture. Meanwhile, in his self-imposed prison on the edge of the forest, Ben Carter's conscience was at war with his fear. He saw Leo's face on the news, read the articles painting him as a potential suspect. Ben knew Leo was innocent. He knew Leo had stumbled into the same hornet's nest that he was hiding from. Every day, the urge to come forward grew stronger, a physical pressure in his chest. But every day, the image of his own daughter's face, smiling and safe, held him back. The men in the black SUV were a constant, unseen presence. Ben knew they hadn't just forgotten about the forest. One afternoon, while scanning the access roads, he saw it again. The same black SUV, parked discreetly on a logging trail a few miles from his cabin. They were watching, surveying, making sure the woods stayed quiet. The sight sent a fresh wave of terror through him. They weren't just ruthless, they were meticulous. The cruelty of the unseen employer. The man Alistair Finch had hired to clean up his mess was not limited to threats. It was a calculated campaign to control the narrative. He used his immense wealth and influence to poison The anonymous tips were called into the police, painting Daniel Calloway as a man with a secret gambling problem, suggesting he had taken his family and run to escape debts. Stories were leaked to tabloid websites about Sarah's supposed affair, a fabrication designed to create a plausible, if tragic, reason for a domestic dispute gone wrong. The Calloways were being murdered a second time, their reputations systematically destroyed, their memory desecrated. It was a masterclass in misdirection, and it was working. Public sympathy began to wane, replaced by suspicion and sordid curiosity. The search for a missing family was slowly being transformed into the manhunt for a potential fugitive. Leo, isolated and under suspicion, felt the walls closing in. The police surveillance was a constant reminder of his precarious position. He felt like a mouse in a maze, with predators on all sides. One evening, desperate for some semblance of control, he decided to go back. Back to the campground, back to the fire pit. He had to be sure. He had to know if he'd missed something. He waited until after midnight, slipping out of his house like a thief, avoiding the board officer in the patrol car. The drive back to Ochoko was fraught with paranoia. Every pair of headlights in his rearview mirror was them. He parked his truck a mile from the campground and hiked in using a small flashlight, the beam dancing nervously over the trail. The campground was eerie, silent, wrapped in yellow police tape. It felt like a desecrated tomb. He found the fire ring, now a mess of disturbed ash and dirt from the forensics team's sweep. He got on his hands and knees, the flashlight beam, cutting a frantic path through the darkness. He ran his fingers through the cold, gritty ash, searching for a tiny piece of plastic that might not even exist. He was so focused, so consumed by his desperate search, that he didn't hear the footsteps, until it was too late. A heavy boot slammed into his ribs, knocking the wind out of him. He gasped, rolling onto his back, the flashlight beam spinning wildly into the sky. A figure stood over him, a dark silhouette against the star-dusted canopy. It was Snake Tattoo. Looking for this, the man grunted. He held up a small black object between his thumb and forefinger, a memory card. Leo's heart stopped. It was real. "You're a persistent son of a bitch, I'll give you that," the man said, his voice a low growl. "My employer doesn't like persistence." He had been played. The man had the card all along. The threats, the psychological torment, it was all a test. A way to see if Leo knew what was on it. A way to see if he would lead them to anyone else. His return to the campsite was the final confirmation they needed. He knew something. Or rather, they thought he knew something. "Don't know what's on that," Leo choked out. The pain in his ribs, a sharp stabbing fire. "I swear to God." "Doesn't matter what you know," the man said, taking a step closer. "It only matters what you saw." He raised his boot again, aiming for Leo's head. This was it. This was how it ended. A tragic accident in the woods. Another body for the forest to keep. Suddenly, a blinding light flooded the clearing, and a voice roared through the darkness. "Get away from him." Snake Tattoo froze, shielding his eyes. Ben Carter stood at the edge of the clearing, his face pale and terrified, holding a powerful spotlight in one hand and his old hunting rifle in the other. Gus, his scruffy dog, was at his side, barking furiously. For a moment, no one moved. It was a standoff between three broken men in a haunted forest. The coward, the victim, and the monster. Snake Tattoo slowly lowered his foot, his eyes darting between Leo on the ground and Ben at the edge of the trees. He weighed his options, a cold reptilian calculation in his eyes. Then, with a final, contemptuous sneer at Leo, he turned and vanished back into the darkness. As silent and sudden as he had appeared, Ben rushed to Leo's side, the rifle still shaking in his hands. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" Leo coughed, pushing himself up, his ribs screaming in protest. Who are you?" "My name is Ben Carter," he said, his voice trembling. "I live out here. I saw everything." The confession, hung in the cold night air, a secret finally brought into the light. The fear in Ben's eyes was still there, but it was mixed with something else now, a flicker of resolve. He had finally stepped out of the shadows. But in doing so, he had just painted a target on both of them. The monster had been driven back into the darkness, but he wasn't gone. He was just regrouping. And now, he knew there wasn't just one loose end, there were two. The conflict had just escalated from a one-man siege to a two-front war, and they were hopelessly outgunned. You saw what Leo whispered, the pain in his side momentarily forgotten, replaced by a jolt of adrenaline. He stared at the strange man, this ghost of the forest who had appeared out of nowhere like a deus ex machina. I saw them take the family, Ben said, his voice cracking. He finally lowered the rifle, the weight of his confession seeming to crush him, a black SUV. Two men, the one who was just here, and another one. They forced them in. Daniel, Sarah, the little girl. All of them. The scene played out in Leo's mind, a horrifying movie filling in the gaps of his imagination. The neat campsite, the sudden violence, Lily's screams. Why didn't you go to the police? Ben's face crumpled in the harsh glare of the spotlight, shame radiated from him in palpable waves. I was scared. I am scared. These aren't just thugs, they're organized, meticulous. I saw him. He gestured to the darkness where Snake Tattoo had disappeared, come back a week later. He burned their things in this very fire pit. The girl's backpack. The map you found, he was erasing them. Leo's mind reeled. The burned map wasn't just a discarded clue, it was a failed attempt to destroy the last piece of a puzzle. And the memory card. The memory card, Leo breathed. He had it. He asked me if I'd found it. Ben's eyes widened. A memory card. What was on it? I don't know. But whatever it is, they think I know about it, and now they know you exist. The reality of their situation settled over them, cold and heavy. They were two isolated men against a powerful, unseen enemy. The police didn't trust Leo, and Ben was a hermit with a story so wild it sounded like a delusion. They were utterly, terrifyingly alone. We have to get out of here, Ben said, his fear returning with a vengeance. They'll be back. He helped Leo to his feet, and they stumbled through the dark woods back to Leo's truck, Gus trotting silently beside them. They drove without headlights until they hit the main road, every shadow on the roadside a potential ambush. They ended up at Ben's cabin, a small cluttered shack that smelled of wood smoke and old books. It was a fortress of solitude that had just been breached. For the first time, Ben told his full story. He spoke of his past as a ranger, the wildfire, the guilt that had driven him into exile. He described the Calloway's arrival, the family scenes he'd watched through his binoculars, and the brutal, terrifying efficiency of the abduction. As he talked, he paced the small cabin, his hands twisting together, the words pouring out of him in a torrent of guilt and fear. They knew the family, Leo reasoned, piecing it together. This wasn't random. The man who threatened me mentioned his employer. Someone hired them. Someone powerful enough to make a family disappear and manipulate a police investigation. The name hung in the air, unspoken. The one connection Sarah Calloway had to power and wealth. The father she had tried to escape, Alistair Finch. Her father, Leo said. He's a real estate mogul. I read it in one of the old articles. Disapproved of the husband. It was emotive, thin and speculative, but it was all they had. A ruthless man who saw his son-in-law as unworthy, but enough to have his own daughter and granddaughter kidnapped. It seemed monstrous, unbelievable. There has to be more to it, Ben said, shaking his head. A man doesn't do that to his own family over a dislike of their husband. Their search for answers became a desperate clandestine operation. They were fugitives from both the law and the lawless. Ben, with his intimate knowledge of the forest and its hidden paths, became their scout, while Leo, armed with a burner phone and a laptop, delved into the digital world, trying to find the connection, the secret that had gotten the Calloways killed. The plot twist, the hidden clue they so desperately needed, came from the most unexpected of places. It wasn't a hidden diary or a secret recording. It was buried in Daniel Calloway's obsession with documenting his life. Leo, remembering the articles mentioning Daniel's love of photography, had a thought. He wasn't just storing his photos on hard drives. Like any modern tech-savvy person, he would have a cloud backup. It was a long shot. He needed a password, an email address. He spent 2 days guessing, using every combination of names, birthdays, and anniversaries he could find. In public records, Sarah Colloway, Daniel Levessera, Lilybug07. Nothing worked. He was about to give up when he tried one last, desperate combination, a phrase from a public post on Daniel's old-school teacher profile. Under his favorite quotes, he had listed one, Firepit. "The truth will set you free," he typed. It in access granted. Leo's heart stopped. He had access to the Calloway family's entire digital life, a cloud storage account filled with thousands of photos and videos. It was a ghost library, a heartbreakingly intimate portrait of a life that had been extinguished. He saw videos of Lily's first steps, of birthdays, of family vacations. He felt like a voyeur, a trespasser in their sacred memories. He didn't know what he was looking for, a clue, a face in the background of a photo. He started with the most recent files, the ones uploaded in the days before their camping trip, and that's when he found it. It wasn't a photo, it was a video file, mislabeled as Lily's soccer practice. The thumbnail was black. Curious, Leo clicked play. The video was shaky, clearly filmed in secret. It was dark, but Leo could make out the interior of a lavish office. Daniel Calloway was there, but he was hiding, filming from behind a slightly ajar door. In the center of the room, 2 men were talking. One was Alistair Finch, Sarah's father. He looked exactly like his photos. Imperious, cold, radiating an aura of untouchable power. The other man, Leo's blood ran cold. It was the man from the motel parking lot. Snake tattoo. The audio was clear. Daniel must have used a high-quality microphone. "The land survey is complete," Snake Tattoo was saying. "The geological report confirms it. It's one of the largest undeveloped lithium deposits in North America." Alistair Finch smiled. A chilling, predatory expression. "And the environmental impact report?" "Buried. The official survey submitted to the BLM shows nothing but worthless rock. As far as the government is concerned, that land is pristine, untouchable wilderness. Perfect for a new national monument designation, just like your friends in Washington are pushing for." "Excellent," Finch said. "Once the area is designated, it will be locked away from public development for a century. No mining, no drilling. Except for the private parcels." "Your parcels," Snake Tattoo clarified. "Precisely. The ones I've been acquiring through shell corporations for the last 5 years. The ones that just happen to sit directly on top of this worthless rock. Once the monument is created, my parcels will be the only ones with pre-existing mineral rights. I'll have a monopoly. The value will be astronomical." Leo felt sick. This wasn't just about family disapproval. This was about a massive criminal conspiracy. Alistair Finch was using his political connections to create a national monument. Not to preserve nature, but to corner the market on a priceless mineral deposit hidden beneath it. The Ochoco National Forest, the Calloway's favorite getaway, was the target. The video continued. "There's a problem," Snake Tattoo said. "Your daughter, her husband has been snooping around. He's a history teacher, a bleeding heart. Environmentalist. He's been looking into old land deeds, filing information requests about the monument proposal. He knows something." Alistair Finch's face hardened. Daniel is a sentimental fool. What could he possibly know? He knows enough to be a problem. He hired a private surveyor. He took his own soil samples on his last camping trip. He has proof, Alistair, proof that the land is rich in lithium. He has a memory card with the surveyor's report, the GPS coordinates, the lab results, everything. The memory card. It wasn't a bluff. It was the smoking gun. Alistair Finch was silent for a long moment. The air in the video crackled with menace. "My daughter, does she know?" "We don't think so." It seems he was trying to protect her, to get all his facts straight before he came to you. He still thinks you can be reasoned with. Finch let out a cold, humorless laugh. The boy is a fool. This is bigger than him. It's bigger than Sarah. This is about legacy. Power. You cannot build an empire with sentiment. He turned to face Snake Tattoo, his eyes like chips of ice. I want that memory card. I don't care what it takes. Get it, and silence him. Silence them all. My daughter included. She made her choice when she married that weakling. No loose ends. No loose ends. The phrase hit Leo like a physical blow. This was a death sentence. Signed by a father, against his own child and grandchild. The video ended. Leo sat there, staring at the black screen, his body trembling. This was the full conspiracy. Daniel hadn't just stumbled onto a secret, he had uncovered a crime so vast it was staggering. He had tried to do the right thing, to confront his father-in-law, and for that, he and his entire family had been erased. The memory card was everything. It was the one piece of physical evidence that could bring Alistair Finch's empire crashing down. And Snake Tattoo had it. He had taken it from Leo at the campground. Or had he? Leo's mind flashed back to the chaotic moment. The boot in his ribs, the blinding spotlight, the standoff. Snake Tattoo had held up a memory card. But in the confusion, in the darkness, had Leo actually seen it clearly? Or had he just seen what he was told he was seeing? A new, electrifying thought sparked. In his mind, he remembered the man's words at the motel. He seems to think you might have found something else. Something smaller, easier to pocket. They didn't know for sure that he didn't have it. The whole campaign of terror, the attack at the campground, it was all a desperate, violent fishing expedition. They were trying to flush it out. He scrambled back to the fire pit in his memory. The ash, the charred log, the corner of the laminated map. He had used a stick to pry it out. Then he had brushed the soot away with his thumb. He closed his eyes, trying to feel it again. The gritty ash, the warped plastic, and something else. A tiny bump, a slight unevenness on the back of the map, right under the tape that held the Polaroid in place. His heart hammered in his chest. He fumbled in his jacket, his hands shaking so badly he could barely function. He had kept the original map fragment, the one he'd given to the police, being a high-resolution copy Harding had made. He'd held on to the original, a strange, sentimental need to keep the one tangible link to the family. He pulled it out, the charred, bubbled piece of plastic. He turned it over. There, taped beneath the faded photos of the smiling family, was a tiny, almost invisible lump. The heat of the fire had warped the lamination around it, sealing it in a protective cocoon. With trembling fingers, he used his pocket knife to carefully slit the plastic. He peeled back the tape, and there it was. A micro SD card. Daniel Calloway, in a moment of desperate genius, hadn't just hidden the proof. He had hidden it in plain sight. He had taped it to the back of his daughter's treasure map, a map she would surely keep safe. A map that looked like nothing more than a child's innocent drawing. He had hidden the key to a billion-dollar conspiracy inside a symbol of his love for his family. Snake Tattoo didn't have the card. He had been bluffing, using a dummy card to try and force Leo's hand. They still thought it was lost in the woods, but it wasn't lost. It was here. It was in his hand. The stakes had just shifted seismically. This was no longer about personal survival. It was about justice for the Callaways. It was about exposing a monster who would sacrifice his own family for greed. The tension cranked to its absolute maximum. Leo and Ben weren't just witnesses anymore. They were the keepers of the truth. The holders of the one weapon that could burn Alistair Finch's empire to the ground. And the most dangerous man in the world had no idea they had it. The air in Ben's cabin was thick with the gravity of their discovery. The tiny micro SD card sat on the rough-hewn wooden table between them, a speck of plastic holding the weight of a dynasty. It was both a death warrant and a key to salvation. "We can't go to the police," Leo said, his voice low and certain. "Harding already thinks I'm involved, and Finch has people everywhere. We hand this over, it disappears into an evidence locker, and we disappear into the forest." Permanently, Ben nodded, his face grim. "So what do? We can't take on a man like Alistair Finch ourselves. We're a ghost and a murder suspect. No, Leo said, a new, cold fire in his eyes. The fear was still there, a knot in his stomach, but it was being burned away by a righteous fury. He thought of Lily's gap-toothed smile, of Daniel's desperate attempt to protect his family. We don't take him on in the shadows. We drag him into the light, we give them a show. A cinematic payoff. The plan they hatched was audacious, reckless, and possibly suicidal. It was a plan born of desperation, and fueled by the Callaways' memory. They wouldn't leak the video to the press. Finch's lawyers would tie it up in court for years, discredit it, bury it. They needed something more immediate, more undeniable. They needed a public confession. The opportunity was perfect, a gift. From the universe's darkest sense of irony, Alistair Finch, in a grand act of philanthropic hypocrisy, was hosting a massive fundraising gala. The event's purpose, to raise the final funds needed to lobby Washington for the creation of the Callaway Wilderness Preserve, a new national monument named in honor of his tragically lost daughter and her family. He was using their memory to put the final nail in the coffin of his own crime. The gala was in 3 days, at a lavish hotel in downtown Portland. It would be crawling with media, politicians, and the city's elite. It was the perfect stage. The next 72 hours were a blur of frantic preparation. Ben used his old Ranger contacts to get his hands on the hotel's blueprints and security schematics. He was a man transformed. The guilt that had paralyzed him for weeks was now channeled into a laser-focused determination. He was no longer hiding from his past, he was using it. He identified the hotel's AV room, the nerve center that controlled every screen and speaker, in the grand ballroom. Leo, meanwhile, focused on the weapon. He spent hours editing the video from the cloud, cutting it down to its most damning 2 minutes. Finch's cold dismissal of his son-in-law, the talk of lithium deposits, and the final, chilling order, silenced them all, my daughter included. No loose ends. He embedded the video file with the contents of the memory card, the surveyor's report, the lab results, the GPS data so that anyone with the right software could see the raw proof. He made dozens of copies on cheap USB drives, each one a digital bomb. The night of the gala, the city glittered with a cold, indifferent beauty. Leo and Ben, dressed in ill-fitting waiter uniforms they'd bought from a costume shop, felt like ghosts at the feast. They slipped in through a service entrance, their hearts pounding in time with the muffled bass of the orchestra playing inside. Their fake IDs, courtesy of one of Ben's shadier contacts, held up under the cursory glance of the security guard. They split up. Ben, carrying a toolbox, made his way to the AV room in the basement. He found it manned by a single board technician. With a quiet apology, Ben used a chloroform-soaked rag, another item from his contact's unsettling inventory, to put the man to sleep, hiding him comfortably in a supply closet. He then plugged his laptop into the main console. He had control. Leo's job was harder. He had to navigate the ballroom, a glittering sea of champagne glasses and false smiles. He moved through the crowd, his tray of hors d'oeuvres trembling in his hands. He saw him across the room, Alistair Finch. He was holding court, surrounded by sycophants, a picture of grieving father and benevolent tycoon. He would periodically dab his eyes with a handkerchief, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke of his beloved Sarah. The hypocrisy was so profound it was nauseating. Leo's target was a table near the stage, where the most prominent media personalities were seated. With practiced ease, he moved from person to person, offering canapes, and with each stop, he let a single USB drive slip from his sleeve, dropping it discreetly onto a side plate or next to a wine glass. He was planting seeds of truth in a garden of lies. His heart nearly stopped when he saw Snake Tattoo standing near the stage, his eyes scanning the crowd. He was Finch's shadow, the ever-present enforcer. For a terrifying moment, their eyes met. Leo saw a flicker of recognition, of confusion. What is the waiter doing here? Leo held his breath, turned, and moved away, melting back into the sea of black and white uniforms. It was time. He tapped the small, hidden earpiece he was wearing. "Ben, are you ready?" "Ready?" Ben's voice crackled back. "On your signal." Alistair Finch was walking to the podium for the keynote address. The room fell silent. A massive screen behind him showed a professionally produced photo montage of the Calloway family, laughing, hiking, living the life he had stolen from them. "My friends," Finch began, his voice resonating with practiced grief, "we are here tonight to honor the memory of my daughter, Sarah, my son-in-law, Daniel, and my precious granddaughter, Lily. They loved the wilderness. They loved the Ochoko Forest. This monument, the Calloway Wilderness Preserve, will be their legacy, a testament to their beautiful, tragically short lives." Leo felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. He looked at the faces in the crowd, the rapt expressions, the dabbing eyes. They were eating it up. "Now," he whispered into his earpiece. On the massive screen behind Alistair Finch, the smiling face of Lily Calloway suddenly dissolved into static. The speakers crackled. Finch faltered, turning to look at the screen, an expression of annoyance on his face, and then it began. The shaky, secret video filled the screen. The sound of Finch's own voice, cold and ruthless, echoed through the grand ballroom. "It's one of the largest undeveloped lithium deposits in North America." A collective gasp went through the crowd. People looked at each other, confused. Finch's face went white. He stared at the screen in horror, his carefully constructed world shattering in front of 1,000 witnesses. On screen, his conversation with Snake Tattoo continued, each word a nail in his coffin. "Silence them all, my daughter included. No loose ends." The final words hung in the dead silent room, an indictment from which there was no escape. The video froze on a close-up of Alistair Finch's face, his eyes cold and dead. Then, the screen filled with the surveyor's report, the geological data. The undeniable proof from the memory card scrolling slowly for everyone to see. It was a bombshell. A public execution. Finch stood at the podium, paralyzed, exposed. The mask was gone. The crowd was no longer looking at a grieving father. They were looking at a monster. The silence was broken by a single sound, the clicking of a dozen reporters opening the USB drives Leo had left for them. Snake Tattoo was already moving, pushing through the stunned crowd, his hand inside his jacket. He was heading for the exit, for his master. But as he reached the edge of the ballroom, two figures blocked his path. Detective Harding and a team of uniformed officers. She had a grim, satisfied look on her face. Someone in the media, upon seeing the video, had done the right thing and called her immediately. "Alistair Finch," Harding's voice boomed, cutting through the chaos as she approached the stage, her gun drawn. "You are under arrest for the murders of Daniel, Sarah, and Lily Calloway." Finch didn't move. He just stared out at the sea of faces, the cameras flashing, capturing his downfall for the entire world to see. The great man, the titan of industry, was reduced to nothing. A common murderer, exposed in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. Leo watched from the shadows. The tray fallen from his hands. He felt no joy, no triumph. Just a vast, hollow emptiness. He had done it. He had gotten justice for the but it wouldn't bring them back. He saw Lily's gap-toothed smile in his mind, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to cry. Not for his own loss, but for hers. The cinematic payoff was complete, a spectacle of ruin and exposure. But the applause was only the sound of a family's final heartbreaking echo. The aftermath was a whirlwind of flashing lights and screaming headlines. Alistair Finch's arrest at his own sham gala became a global media sensation. The story had everything. A billionaire patriarch, a secret conspiracy, a vast mineral fortune, and the cold-blooded murder of his own family. The Calloway case, once a local tragedy, was now a symbol of corporate greed and sociopathic evil. The video Leo had aired went viral, played on a loop on every news network, a permanent digital monument to Finch's monstrosity. Leo and Ben were taken into protective custody, their stories finally heard, finally believed. Detective Harding, her earlier suspicions replaced by a grudging respect, personally debriefed them. The memory card was the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Its data cross-referenced and verified, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence. Snake Tattoo, whose real name was Marcus Thorne, a disgraced ex-Special Forces operator turned corporate fixer, flipped on his employer in exchange for a lesser sentence. He led investigators to the bodies. The Callaways had not been buried in the forest. Finch, in his arrogance, had wanted them gone completely. Thorne confessed they had been weighted down and dropped into the deepest part of Crater Lake. Their final resting place, a cold, pristine tomb nearly 2,000 feet below the surface. The public revelation sent a fresh wave of horror and revulsion through the community. The lake, a place of profound natural beauty, was now a gravesite. The trial was a formality. Faced with the video, the memory card, and Thorne's testimony, Alistair Finch's high-priced lawyers could do nothing. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The cameras captured him being led from the courtroom, a shrunken, hollowed-out man, his empire in ruins. His name forever synonymous with filicide. For Leo, the end of the trial did not bring peace. It brought a quiet, aching emptiness. He had found a purpose in his quest for justice, a mission that had silenced the ghosts of his own past for a short time. Now, in the silence, they began to whisper again. He sold his house, the one Marcus Thorne had threatened to burn, and put the money in a trust for Ben's daughter. It was the only way he knew how to say thank you. He didn't stay in Oregon. The forests there were no longer a sanctuary for him. They were a place of secrets and sorrow. He started driving, with no destination in mind, just moving. He was running again, but this time, it felt different. He wasn't running from a memory, but towards an unknown future. Months later, he found himself in a small coastal town in Maine. The air smelled of salt and pine, a different kind of wilderness. He got a job fixing boat engines, a simple, mechanical task that quieted his mind. He lived in a small apartment overlooking the harbor, and in the evenings, he would walk along the rocky shore, watching the tide come in and out, a rhythm of erasure and return. One day, a package arrived for him at the marina. It was from Ben. Inside was a letter and a small, framed photograph. The letter was short. Ben wrote that he had started working with the Forest Service again, not as a ranger, but as a consultant, helping to design wilderness education programs for kids. He was reconnecting with his own daughter. He was healing. "You gave me my life back, Leo," he wrote. "I hope you can find yours." Leo looked at the photograph. It was taken at the dedication ceremony for the new national park. After Finch's arrest, the government had gone ahead with the monument, but they had changed the name. It was no longer the Callaway Wilderness Preserve. It was now the Lily Callaway National Monument, named for the little girl whose treasure map had brought an empire to its knees. The photo showed a simple, granite marker at the trailhead, near the lightning-scarred ponderosa pine. The inscription on the marker was from a poem, and it read, "And when the earth shall claim your limbs, then shall you truly dance." Leo taped the photograph to the wall of his small apartment. He looked at it every day. It was a haunting reflection, a reminder of the terrible cost of truth. The Callaways were gone. His own daughter was gone. Nothing could change that. But in the quiet solitude of his new life, he began to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, not yet, but a flicker of it. A fragile, tentative piece. He had found a torn map in a fire pit and unraveled a nightmare. He had brought a monster to justice and given a family back their names. He hadn't been able to save his own daughter, but he had, in the end, saved Lily's memory from being buried under a mountain of lies. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The emotional echo of the Callaway tragedy would always be with him, a part of his story, but it was no longer the only sound. In the distance, he could finally begin to hear the faint, hopeful whisper of his own life, waiting to be lived. The tide was coming in.